everybody. Today we are joined by a guest who is deeply familiar with the often overlooked but critical aspects of a field, Ken Johnson. Ken is a co founder and CTO of DryRun Security, the first AI native code security company that identifies code risk like an experienced AppSec engineer without slowing down developers. Before embarking on his founder's journey, Ken was in the trenches shaping security practices at one of the world's largest developer platforms, GitHub. He's also a respected voice in the community, known for his work in the open source world, and also as a co host of the popular Absolute AppSec podcast. Today, we are going to dive into Ken's fascinating career from practitioner to founder. We'll explore the innovative ideas behind Dryden Security's contextual security analysis and how it's changing the way we think about security feedback. And of course, we'll get his unvarnished takes on the real world, everyday challenges, and opportunities in the world of application security. Ken, welcome to the Boring AppSec podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And yeah, I followed both of you on LinkedIn and just sort of like your posts and things you put out there and your content and watched your blog or excuse me, your podcast. And yeah, I just it's pretty awesome to link up this way. Thank you for having me on here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to have you
I'm
here.
glad. Yeah. Do you want to kick us off with just saying a little bit about kind of what DryRun does and what you do at DryRun?
Sure. Yeah. And it's an interesting journey to just I think because, where we started off is not where we landed, right? So I can talk about what we do though first, and then how we got there probably would be also I think maybe interesting.
Mhm.
So yeah, primarily, we're not, although we do have quite a bit of work we've done and do with like code reviews, meaning like pull requests in a GitLab or a GitHub style flow. I know they've got different terms depending on the SCM that you use, but basically pull requests, code changes. So we have like a code review bit of functionality in the product there. Um, and what's different about that is that it's AI native, and so that uncovers things that can't you can't do, right? And we can get into that, what that means as during this conversation if we want to get into that. But basically, think of all the things you couldn't get reviewed before, like or you couldn't get a scanner to find before, like authorization flaws or logic flaws, things that like we as practitioners just realized a long time ago. Hey, we have limitations with our tools. They can't find those kinds of things. We can't guess in advance all the different patterns that we would have to write to catch those kinds of things. It's just too hard. So we sort of say, well, we use humans for real code review to find like more nuanced problems, and uh, we use those other tools for sort of the low hanging fruit. That's just always been the acknowledgement. But we're in a different space now. Like we have different foundational technologies we can do more, and so that's on the code change front. That's what we're doing. We also have policy enforcement, and this is like we have customers who have crazy complex authorization schemas, things where like you look at GraphQL and there's like 6 different ways to authorize, right, a mutation. And they're like, hey, I can't write rules to find all the different permutations of the ways this can go wrong. But what I can do is give kind of some general background about the problem, where in the code base we tend to see it, just any information that might be helpful. I can ask a question, does it have XYZ style of authorization problems? And I can apply that and have that enforced on every code change. And I can be aware if one of those kinds of issues I'm concerned about actually, crop up in a code change. And that's just something, again, we didn't really have the opportunity for. But I think some of the other things that we're doing are even more interesting to me anyways. So like one thing that we're exposing soon will be a MCP connector. I know everybody's got an MCP connector, but the actual value of this connector, and we can even talk about MCP, it's been wild to look at. As we've implemented our own MCP server, we realize like, wow, this is a wild west of like when it comes to security. But yeah, in any case, our connector is going to allow you to actually search for the types of changes that you might be interested in. So this isn't just security like
Oh.
vulnerabilities. We're talking about actually, since we capture everything that happens all the time in your organization, you can actually say like, hey, did you see any, I don't know, new admin dashboards added, or tell me about anything that just might be more generally interesting for feature wise that's been shipped that I as a security person need to know about in the last 7 days, right?
Mm.
So what we're really moving towards is using this technology to become a more robust, I guess, scale your AppSec team kind of tool, like
Yeah.
manage your program kind of tool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's
No,
that
this is
at a high level. That's what we're doing.
yeah. No, that's really interesting, right? I kind of want to take a take like one step back and think about this a little differently, right? So the question I have for you is, when we started CISO, one of the aspects we always thought about is, where are LLMs actually going to be useful, and where is it going to be yet another chatbot? Because the world, God knows, the world doesn't need that, right? So do you have any kind of like mental models or frameworks to think about saying, hey, ABC kind of problems, LLMs are a good are a good tool to be used. Whereas for some other problems, maybe we don't really need LLMs. And I specifically want to ask that question because for a lot of us, and you're right, there are a lot of kinds of vulnerabilities that SaaS tools cannot find today. But the reality is that it kind of almost felt like, hey, SaaS already exists, right? So did we really need to reinvent this? I know
Yeah.
the answer is yes, but I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on how you came to the decision, and more importantly, kind of what kind of problems do you think LLMs are good at solving versus it just hallucinates or throws up information which is not very useful.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack in that one sort of question. So what I will say is actually with regards to CISO, what was really like you guys tackled one of the first problems I saw LLMs being able to solve for people.
Hmm.
And it's because like anyways, I found out about it just so you know, like kind of through the absolute AppSec community. Actually, somebody I was
Hmm.
talking to was like, "Hey, there's this company, and I've heard they're doing this. The it's there's stealth mode rumors. They're going to be doing this thing." And I was like, "That's amazing. Somebody should be doing
Yeah.
that. Somebody needs to
Yeah.
tackle because what you get." When you use AI in your capacity as things change, or if you're doing, I don't know, maybe you'll do like, um, I don't know, the application. I need to do a point in time review of
Hmm.
this specific feature that's being added, whatever it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
That is a great place because you can give actually a lot of information to a system that's doing some analysis, such as like what is changing, right? What are the
Yeah.
risks associated with that? What parts of the code base is it touching? And is that like problematic in any kind of way?
Hmm.
Take into account these other systems and how it's going to interact with them. Also, here's these preconditions of things that we're just generally concerned about.
Yeah.
Anyways, you can put this all together, and the more information you feed, the better, and the more refinement you perform, you get these really awesome pictures of where real risk lie and how to actually document that in a repeatable fashion. So when I heard about
Correct.
what
Yeah.
you're accomplishing with LLMs, I was like, oh, that's a perfect use case.
Thank you. Yeah.
And so
Uh,
truly, I think that like even with our product, right? We had this, we ripped it out, we're putting it back in, but
mhm.
and we ripped it out because our product was in a nascent state. Like we'll say, I don't know, a year and a half ago is really early,
Mhm.
right? Nobody really used the chat, but what we're seeing now is there's people that have a desire to basically have all of the remediation to essentially do all first line triage inside of
Mm.
a pull request. So to your point, like it's like, okay, well, a SaaS tool can find flaws. It doesn't find a lot of flaws, but it finds some specific flaws on a repeatable fashion in a repeatable fashion. But does it actually like work with a security person? Does it work with the developer to get to the point of resolution? Or do you have to like say, hey, I had a flag raised. Let me go talk to a person to get
Mm.
some sort of information sorted out? In today's world, you can get some level of answers, I'm sure, from your vibe coded AI assistant in your IDE. I'm sure you can get some. But if you really want like true security expertise, one thing we're getting asked to do is like implement feedback, right? So we're putting our feedback back in, which it means that you as an AppSec person, you don't have to respond to every single inquiry about, hey, something said I did something wrong. Instead,
Mm.
you have a communication trail that you can observe that shows like there were follow-up questions, they got answers, things are fixed, never had to reach out to me. But if they do need to reach out to me, I have an escalation path. So where I see this going, I'll say at a high level, where I see AI helping is with actually just enhancing a lot of the capabilities that we do. One of the things
Hmm.
that I recently built was a full repo scanner. And I think this is where I'm starting to see this mental shift for me. When I built the full repo scanner, the results looked very different from a traditional scanner. It actually looked like a pen tester's report.
Hmm.
And that's the moment I started to realize, like, fundamentally, this isn't a promotion of my company. What I'm saying is, or AI in general, what I'm saying is, when you think about that, we're going from a world where tooling can more closely match some of the capabilities of humans and can do some of the much more complex things that it couldn't do previously. And so,
Hmm.
whether that is finding more complex flaws, helping remediate things, whether that's even just awareness of things going on in your organization, whether that's helping categorically burned like assess like where are my biggest risks, right? If you have a system plugged into like your service catalog and you have a system plugged into changes coming across the line and you
Uh-huh.
have a system plugged into security reviews, you have a very nice way to prioritize which things coming online need to actually be reviewed by a human being and what things need to be
Yeah.
reviewed, like what gaps couldn't have been solved by a human being. So in terms of just even like release processes to like interacting with developers to automating education. I mean, there's just so many ways to apply this technology.
Yeah. No, I think as you were saying this, one of the thoughts that hit me is that even if you just look at the CI/CD pipeline today, forget security for a second, and just look at the way the software development lifecycle is. Um, except code generation, which is kind of like whatever VS Code is kind of given way to Cursor and Windsurf and Copilot, etc. The rest of the CI/CD pipeline looks exactly the same today as it did, I don't know, 2 years ago. Right? Right? We still, I mean, like for example, in our company, and this is one of the things we get really annoyed with, is that all our prompts are stored like code, which is kind of dumb because the way you do versioning with prompts are not the way you want to do versioning with code. But there's nothing in the world to kind of do prompt management really seamlessly with GitHub. Right? We have so many
Yeah.
frameworks and mental models to write test cases, but there are so few to do that for evals unless you're building a chatbot. Right? So I kind of feel like we kind of like targeting we're kind of fighting two battles here. One is we're trying to kind of use LLMs to secure the traditional problems that exist in AppSec today, and then we'll also have to respond to all the changes that's going to happen in the SDLC in the next 18 months for sure, and then we're going to have answers to that as well. So I kind of feel like we have to do
Yeah.
it almost twice over right now.
That's where I'm at. Yeah, that's where you're at, right? Like that's
Yeah.
trying to preempt because like so there are things that all right, so you're saying CI/CD looks mostly the same. Yeah, that's true, except for one exception that recently cropped up was like now you can auto assign an issue to Copilot and Copilot will
Hmm.
go out and it'll submit a pull request and you can actually it has the same interface as like actions, right? So you can actually
Hmm.
see it. They show you it reasoning through what it's doing and how it's, maybe going out to the web to get some more information to
Hmm.
help, have a better result in the thing it recommends, in the pull
Yeah.
request it creates, whatever it is. You get to
Yeah.
see sort of that happening. But my point is really now you have something as like a non-human team member. And I know that Daniel
Hmm.
Miesler's talked a lot about like the concept of an entity, right? Because an entity in these days, now we have to start to say like there's human entities and there's AI
Hmm.
entities.
None.
And
Yeah.
you have essentially an AI entity on your team as a team member who's now doing things as a team member, but like you didn't educate them, you didn't sign off
Yeah.
on them, So I sit here and I think back to your like getting ahead of things, right? Is like my first challenge that I faced with LLMs was repeatability, um, accuracy, testing. Like testing and evaluation's a moat for sure
Yeah.
in this day and age. Orchestration is a moat because how you orchestrate AI is everything. It's the reason where I have like Windsurf in front of me right now. I have Claude Desktop and Claude Code. I could sit there and ask it to do a review. It's not going to do a review like another security centric AI system because it's not orchestrated the same way. So orchestration is a
Yeah.
moat. And then I'd say the last thing is like user experience is a moat as well. So
Hmm.
those were the kind of the first challenges I faced personally, and I'm sure you've faced those. But now where it's going is like, all right, I have this moving target of where development's going. How do I It's, for me, it's a real fear. Like I don't want to be just a slightly better SaaS in an entirely new world with an entirely new foundational technology. I want to do something different, right? I want to do something impactful. Um, and at the same time, you've got to fit within people's line item budgets and meet their requirements, but you have to think about that moving target constantly. And
Yeah.
I've talked about it with a lot of people. I don't. It's hard to predict where development's going. I've seen like Chad Fowler recently. If
Mm.
anyone's familiar with Chad Fowler, big name in the Ruby community, kind of I think started RailsConf or RubyConf or something like that. Um, and I had worked for him at Living Social. He's just a great guy, and he had put on and he's very intelligent and he sees where things are going. And he put on LinkedIn like the kind of almost insinuating that the culture of programming is dying a bit in the sense that they were like, they'd have these massive arguments over, different programming languages, nuances, and yada, 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 right? All of the
Mhm.
arguments we've all witnessed and been a part of and had ourselves. But this day and age, people are just trying to vibe code. They're just trying to get things produced. Like people need features built. This is a way to get that done quickly. And so those like in a corporate day job sense, that like artisanal love of code is changing. You are now
Mm.
really just trying to like push, push, push. And we're seeing all these tooling, all this tooling being given to developers, and that's certainly gonna it changes the velocity. I don't know what it's gonna change in terms of,
Yeah.
like, release processes, SDLC, and everything else that comes along, but that's what we're all trying to figure out is how to get
Yeah.
ahead of that and
Yeah,
prepare
I
for it.
I I know Anshuman has a question to you, but for you, but just one last point on that, right? I kind of feel like the entire industry has spent the last 10 years training developers, and we've sort of succeeded at it and sometimes failed at it. And now we have like a whole bunch of non-developers writing code. Like a company that we're working with has their product teams writing front-end code now because they're like, hey, they have a good sense of what needs to go on the website. So if they want to experiment, they can go and experiment themselves. They don't need to go through developers per se, right? So we spent all this time educating developers and we never educated product folks, we never educated designers, and now they're shipping code. And then imagine what's that going to do, right? So yeah, I'm with you. Like I said, there are two targets, and this is one reason why I kind of every time somebody says, oh, there's another company doing something similar to what you're doing, and I'm like, I don't care, this is so many new things that will be figured out. We need a lot more people to do this, right? And I'm sure when somebody figures out the magical things, everybody else will jump in on it and will double down and improve it. But at this point, we need 1,000 flowers to bloom, right? That's the only way it'll probably solve this.
I agree. Again, there's so much to unpack. One of the things that I really will hone in there is that like we do need. It's funny when we are dealing with other companies of similar stages that are new, that are here to tackle the world's newer problems. We are very friendly with them,
Hmm.
and it's in recognition that like. So I don't want to be disrespectful to companies that paved the way, right? There's an
Hmm.
evolution we had to go through, and tools start in whatever state they start in
Yeah.
with whatever capabilities they have. And obviously that worked and made a lot of people money and prevented a lot of vulnerabilities and whatnot, right? But I do want to
Yeah.
say that those companies, I think if they're not waking up to the fact that like the ground is shifting underneath them
Hmm.
and they're not making plays to address that, they're going to have real problems. So I tend to be really friendly with these newer companies, and the reason is very. I mean, obviously, we're all in this together and all of
Yeah.
that. But it is a very, let's be honest, startups are a very competitive space.
Yeah.
But at this point in time, I guess if I had to just wrap up what I'm saying, it's kind of us and then them, you know what I mean? Like, we kind of just got to see who's shaking out with the right ideas, and that's support each other, because whatever one of us is, or, a multitude of us are doing, that's going to be the future. It's again, if those companies don't make a quick play to start shifting how they do business, yeah, I don't see a huge future for
Yeah.
them. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, you've said so many things, Ken, and I want to double click on a few of them as much as we can. But I think one thing that I would love for us to discuss is this term called context engineering, which we are starting to hear a lot more of. And I really believe that is like an evolution from prompt engineering, right? Because prompt engineering what used to be a thing where if you don't have the right prompts, you're not going to get the right outcomes from AI. And I think that has slowly evolved with over to context engineering, where what exactly do you provide in the prompt needs to be retrieved on the go, right? So since you've been working with these technologies trying to solve security problems, I'm interested to hear how you think about context engineering, especially when it relates to storage, right? So these agents or like whatever LLM workflows, you only have a certain context window, right? So how are you thinking about solving for these problems at scale across multiple customers?
Yeah, we've had to solve these problems at scale across multiple customers. It's been a challenge, and I can tell you that there's a few lessons learned. So one is like keeping the attention really tight as to what you're asking. Like if you throw just as a high level example that I think everybody can kind of understand. If I send code at an LM and I say like, does this have SQL injection? Good luck. You're going to get what you get. And I mean that. Like, even in the best, highest performing models, good luck. And especially when you start to talk about different customers with different patterns, with different technology stacks, it's not simple. So, what we found is like, if you take a question like that and you break it into many little questions, right? Where you're like, hey, let me ask some discrete questions about this function. Like, is it the shape of this? Does it take user supplied input? Does it match blah, 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 blah? If you ask really discrete questions, what you begin to do is be able to backfill with really discrete context for that specific moment. So if for instance, my question is, what is user supplied input? And you don't know necessarily, or maybe you struggle as an LLM. And again, like most of us use multiple LLMs, we have to round robin between different things for different reasons, for different whatever purposes and attributes of the thing that we're asking and reviewing. And so you can't guarantee that the LLM is going to have the best training data on that coming across. So what do? You backfill it to tell it, hey, I know these things about the application and I know what user supplied input looks like in the application. So let me tell you what that looks like. So that's a very basic, high level example of what I think you mean by context engineering. And then there's the question of where do you get that data from? Like because context is not just context. Context can there are times where I'm giving what you might call five different pieces of context, but it's really just attributes that help inform the LLM to get to the most truthful answer it can have.
Yeah.
Um, I'll
Yeah, I
pause there.
think
I'm not sure if that's answering your question.
no, it does. I think there's a few follow-up questions though. So when we think about retrieving the data, right now there are a few strategies there as well. There's retrieval augmented generation (RAGs). There's short-term memory, a long-term memory. There's, I mean, there. I'm seeing different kinds of problems getting solved in different ways, and essentially the way the data is retrieved is also changing. And I've seen that rags have also evolved, right? Because previously, like up until 6 months ago, the context windows was really small, so you had to use rags to get the right context by doing like similarity search and whatnot. But as the context windows have increased, you don't need to use rags anymore. So how are you thinking about this space as it like evolves constantly? How do you choose which approach to take?
Yeah, so you can't. Okay. Oh, this is going to take me a second because I have to break this one down because you're right. Like, okay, there are different. You're absolutely right. There's different types of context. The context windows have. I'll just start with context windows. So, like context windows being like some of the more performant Anthropic models, right? They're around 200,000 tokens. That's what they say. If you've ever worked with them, you realize after about 50,000 tokens, things get a little weird, potentially, right? That gets back to like, what am I doing with 50,000 tokens? That's presumably just, rough math, 200 character or 200,000 characters. What am I doing there? Like, what is the purpose of what I'm going for? And the reason I said is like, if the purpose of that uh, amount of prompting and information I'm giving it plus context, if that big request is like, hey, take, I don't know, take the result of our analysis and apply it against the repo's cursor files to see if there's anything in that cursor file that like we should account for in our analysis. Well, all I'm doing is giving a big old bit of text and I'm saying like, is there anything outside of this other bit of text that would disqualify some of the text here? perfectly useful case. And I think even in large volumes, totally fine. That's great. That's actually a really good use case. When it comes, however, to analysis, like a code review or like a CISO's threat model or something like that, that requires more complex factors, doing a one big request, one big response has like usually awful results. You need to like have a lot, and this is where this is why orchestration is so important. And this is why I don't, when I get on conversations, where people want to get technical, like with sales calls and whatnot, I'm like, all right, if you want to get into it, I can get into it. Orchestration is key because you're taking the fundamental bits of one part of a human brain, which it's, to be fair, like I say this a lot, like, oh, well, patterns are dead and whatnot. Let's be clear though, there is some level of this being analytical pattern matching to a degree, just in a much more robust, like, with what feels like some reasoning, right? Like, so we'll say much, much more robust reasoning and pattern matching to a degree, and some prediction and analysis, right? So one part of how a human brain works. Well, essentially, you're orchestrating with that fundamental capability. You're orchestrating how how that human like kind of interaction goes, or how that human like review um
Mm,
works, how essentially you're building a mini brain. If I had to put it in any other words, I just say you're building a mini brain. And when you
mm,
do that, what we do is we ask, like I said, a lot of different like discrete questions, and those questions might be answers that are provided as context later to the application as part of some other set of questions. And then that's essentially like a cascading set of things you're learning about the application, task planning you're doing about things that fall out of that you think need to be reviewed, going about and actually executing all of that, performing validation. And then, of course, there's the agentic aspect, and agentic aspects really, really help. And I'll pause because I feel like I could get into a whole thing with agentic, because that's really been a powerful unlock for us. But in the going back to the context conversation, I guess the only other thing I could say is that when you talk about different types, I think maybe something that might be helpful for people to understand is that when when people show examples of RAG, I see a lot of times they use like vector databases or some sort of
mm,
similarity search as a way to like, but and sure, that has some use, but those are usually limited to like you're doing a similarity search. So you're that's even more probabilistic sort of analysis if you think about it. It's still, you're doing a search and trying to get back n amount of documents that match whatever thing it is
yeah,
that you're asking a question about. That might not be the right answer. So sometimes, like for us, it can be as simple as literally loading statically written information that could, I mean, heck, it can come from a YAML file if you want it to. It doesn't matter. It doesn't need to be in a vector DB. And that's more of like deterministic information that never changes, that we've already said, like, you need to know this information when we do and perform this analysis. I can feed it in that way. There's the concept of memories, like you talked about. There's even now like these IDEs with AI, they use execution plans. So they'll
mm,
create a temporary file, they'll put a plan of what they're going to do, they'll keep referencing that file and checking things off,
yeah,
just to keep track of where they're at. And that's a really awesome way to keep track of like sort of a long-term memory of a continuation of a conversation you had, that you can go back and reference to see like, why are they asking me this question? What did we talk about before? So I'll just pause there because again, I'm
yeah.
amped
No,
up
no,
and talking a lot.
no. This is awesome. I think this is exactly the kind of conversations we look forward to. I think if I were to follow up with one more question, so talking about repeatability and consistency, right? This is something that comes up quite a bit, and in my experience as well, you know, like I can build a very simple workflow using LLMs, and if I run the same sort of script multiple times, the output is not really the same, right? And I think the more complex the problem becomes, the whole idea of getting the same outcomes actually becomes a really big problem, right? So how have you tried to address this with a DryRun Security?
Yeah, and we actually have a article where you can read more about this coming out on, sorry, I'm doing math in my head. The 15th. I think next week we should be having a an article come out that discusses a bit more in depth. So where we started was actually a pretty simplistic way of testing, and then there's a way we do it now. And the way we started was actually pretty much like imagine having like yes no questions, true false
Oh,
questions, um, taking anonymized data, putting it into the yes no buckets, and then those are like on a per question kind of basis, and then running against the LLM, about 800 different test cases split and seeing how it performs. And you have to rerun those multiple times because, as you said, like the first run might be great, the second run might be great, the third run might be atrocious, the fourth might be like, do you even understand what I'm asking you? The fifth, you're like, I
Mm,
give up, right? So you
yeah.
do have to make sure that you cycle through multiple times. That's the simplistic way we used to do it. Now it's much more robust. It's actually funny because we hopped on a call. This is a little concerning, I think, at times when I look at like the funding ecosystem. I'll say this. I've gotten on calls a couple times now with companies that were like building AI evaluation frameworks or AI agentic frameworks or whatever. And you get on there and you're like, or, yeah, there's some other things that I won't get into product wise, but yeah, you get on these calls and you're like, man, we already built that internally. Like, and
yeah,
yours is a worse version and you got funded as a company for this. Like, not to be mean, but what is happening? So we had that conversation. We got into it because we're thinking, man, ours, I don't know if like ours is proprietary. We're chaining these different things together. Like, maybe there's like a better commercial solution. No, no, it turns out we were doing well.
yeah,
So I'll explain kind of at a high level what we do. So what we do is we have random sampling of data. And we run these evaluations. Our threshold needs to be 90% or higher, right? So it needs to have a 90% accuracy or higher threshold. And when we take this random sampling of data, we have a battle of the LLMs. There's like a truthiness of the outcome so it essentially we have this battle of the LLMs to determine like what is the correct answer it should come across with, and then what did it actually come
mhm,
across with, and that gives us a pretty good idea. Now for us, it's tricky though because we can't just. It's not like we're asking to sample, I don't know, like it's not like generic vulnerabilities, right? We're having to say like because we have core policies. So what we had to do to satisfy people's like who have SaaS tools today, we had to create these core policies that give them assurance that yes, you'll have your command injection, you'll have your SQL injection, you'll have your SSRF and all that. So each one of those gets evaluated. Those are easier because they're like on a specific category. The harder one is when we have sort of our catch-all, and our catch-all goes through and does a bunch of work to essentially assign, categorize, and validate vulnerabilities. This gets a little bit more nuanced because now you have a thing where you have to like pre-label sort of what that
yeah,
thing is. So at a high level, that's kind of what we do. We capture and anonymize data, not all data. There's a percentage of data that we retain. It's anonymized and it's thrown away after we do this testing. We run through our evaluation framework. We do the battle of the bots, figure out if our answers are correct. If we're happy with that, great. If we're not, we know it'll tell us which of the parts of our orchestration, because it's a lot, that we actually have to go and address and fix up. And this is
yeah,
so vital. If we don't do this,
Uh,
if you don't do this, you won't have a production AI
yeah.
grade,
yeah.
or sorry, a production grade AI
Great. Yeah.
product.
I mean,
Yeah.
this conversation is almost therapeutic to listen to. I'll tell you why. Because we've gone through the exact same things where we've gone into, because when you started the company and we realized that, you need evals, there's only so much you can do on vibes. And then you start overfitting to the 4 documents or the 4 core pieces of code that you wrote, right? And then we're like, hey,
Yeah.
we need an eval framework. So we start building it. And then we're like, okay, so there must be somebody who's working on evals full time who's figured this out faster than us. So let's go spend some time talking with them, right? And we did that. And then we were like, wait, every eval framework is written for chatbots and nothing else, right?
Nothing
And
else.
nothing else, right? So we had to like, and I guess this is the exciting and the weird part about building in this space right now is that our only places where we could find any answers were research papers, and then we had to
Yeah.
build on top of that, right? Those are the only places where there are answers, right? So when you're talking about consistency, that's, by the way, that's exactly how CISO works. This is kind of interesting because we've never spoken to each other about this, but we've kind of come to
Uh,
the same conclusion. So maybe it kind of helps us kind of clarify that. Is that if when you're talking about consistency, you have no option but to kind of give some kind of objective answer and some kind of subjective answer. The objective answer is yes, no, 0, 1, true, false, whatever. And the subject is a little more of like nuance, the description on what it says, how the thing is being exploited, right? And there you got to use LLM as a judge, or I think Battle of the Bots is better than LLM as a judge. I'll start
Oh,
it. Yeah.
it's,
Like LLM as a judge sounds so boring now. We're going to change that name, right? And I think
Yeah.
that it's really interesting. And it's really weird. People always say, build the shovels when the picks and shovels when the gold rush happens. But yeah, if there's one thing I'd like, I don't want to solve all of these problems. I'd rather hop on. I want to pay for an eval framework which will just work out of the box. But the reality of building an AI startup in 2025 is that all of these things you have to build in
Greenfield.
house. Yeah, it has to be greenfield, right? I wonder if there's like a open source thing we can do where we all learn from each other and make it better. But I kind of feel like it's that itself is so much work that somebody's got to make that as an initiative, right? But yeah,
It
like I said,
is. And your
this conversation
tooling
is a
isn't
little
like,
yeah, yeah,
oh, yeah,
yeah.
you want to get talking therapy? We can get really therapeutic. We can talk about what it was like 2 years ago to
yeah.
us trying to work with open source commercial LLMs and the dark
Oh
paths that
yeah,
took my mind down. That
yeah.
was the worst. I mean, people who never had to work in the early space, like building a product around those, like they just have no idea how,
Oh
like, imagine you're going to send 6 requests. The first 2 absolutely nail it. They're flawless,
yeah.
right? The remaining 4, maybe it's just all new lines. Maybe
Mm,
it doesn't even know what you're talking about. Or maybe it just starts telling you a poem and you're like,
yeah.
how is this happening? And it's not just the LLM's performance. At that time, all of the libraries, all of the and then not to say it's still rough. Like we're saying
Yeah.
now, it's still very rough. But imagine 2 years ago, the ecosystem was really, really fragile. Like I remember LangChain, I started with learning with LangChain, and I remember like I want to say every 3 weeks or something, they would have a minor update that would
Mhm.
break production, just
Everything.
flat out break it, flat out just break it outright. Yeah. And I'm like, and like vector DBs were hard, all the tooling around it, everything was just sort of just hard. Right.
Yeah.
And, so like there was a blessing. I mean, I don't know how it was for you all, but this, this struggle was kind of a blessing
Mm,
because it forced us to get a really crisp way of doing things, of orchestrating things. And that was helpful because once we plugged into performant LLMs, because people are like, "Oh, do you train, on our?" And I'm like,
yeah.
"No, I don't train on your data. I'm very much against that if I don't have to. Like at some point, I think that there is value. Let's say you have an on-prem, excuse me, an enterprise customer. I said on-prem. I guess my mind just associates those two.
Yeah.
But you have an enterprise customer, and I don't know, they're going to stick with you for 5 years or 3 years or 6 years or
Mhm.
however long, right? Well, that is kind of one of the advantages of using an AI system for whatever you're using it for, is that over time, there's that concept like you all were talking about of long-term memory, right? Of like,
Mm,
these are the things that we've learned and together and done and we can reference. So like, I do see value, I guess, at some point, if I'm talking about the enterprise and capturing, like, and having a relationship where that's okay with everybody, or we signed off on it, but capturing the right kinds of data to train a model that maybe is used to enhance their specific results. That makes sense. But for most people, it doesn't make sense because if you've set your processing up correctly, if like you've mentioned RAG
mhm.
before a couple times, and just context in general, if you've set your agentic workflows, your context up correctly, your questions, your whatever it is you're doing, like your LLM is going to have moderate performance changes. Um,
Mhm.
Depending, I will say depending, there are like one problematic one, which I don't know if you all have seen, is like Golang. Golang is one that LLM seems to
Mm,
really struggle on,
mm,
and so like I would say Anthropic's models do pretty well with Golang. I would say the other ones struggle a little bit more in our testing, right? And so, yeah, there are some like dips here and there, but for the most part, like if you're doing things correctly with your orchestration, you can swap out with different LLMs. Now, why is this really important? Well, sometimes we have clients that come in and they're like, look, we want you to use it's the same LLM. It's hosted by
yeah,
the
yeah,
same provider, but they're like, but it's ours. And we're like, okay,
yeah.
fair.
Okay.
We can easily swap that out, right? Like if we trained on their data, we can't easily swap out to a different LLM. And here's the other thing. As soon as a more performant like like Google came online with what, their 1 million token length
Tokens. Yeah.
context that like blew
Yeah.
everybody's mind. It's like, well,
Yeah.
what if I want to use that? And I'm really baked into like training some Llama 3.3 model or whatever I'm doing, right? It's like,
Yeah.
well, okay, I'm screwed. Like this is way more performant, and now I'm stuck on this busted old thing. So,
Yeah.
anyways, like I've never seen a lot of value in that.
Yeah.
Not
So-
yet, anyways.
So 2 points I'll make. So one, to wrap up on how it was in the early days, it took us a week-long sprint to get consistent JSON data. It was just so hard to get consistent JSON responses until I think 4.440 came out, or maybe like some version of 4 came out. Anyway, so that's one. I think you make a really good point on the model stuff. I think my rubric is that every time either OpenAI or Anthropic or Gemini release a new model, if you get excited about it, that's the right way to go about it. If you get worried that this is going to kill your startup or make your startup worse, then that's a bad place to be in, right? So I think that's kind of how we look at it. We are like, hey, we need to architect our solution, orchestrate our solution in such a way that we can use the latest models. We can piggyback off the billions of dollars they're spending on research, as opposed to trying to compete with them or kind of trying to go a different direction. I hope someday there's an open source model, which is an open weights model, which is as good as the SOTA models. But until then, our job is to use the best models to drive the best outcomes, as opposed to go off on a crusade of using our own models or fine-tuned models. So yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
And
agree
it's
with that.
also worth mentioning that the AI models are the worst they can ever be today. Like they're only going to get
Yeah.
better, which is what I'm really excited about. Is if the possibilities and opportunities that we've seen sort of makes us believe that look, we can actually have a big impact in the security industry using AI. It's only going to get much better and reliable and consistent as the models improve, and we've all seen that, right? So I think that's something that is really important to drive in like all the conversations I have. This is probably the number one question: is what happens if the models change? How do you decide which model to use? So I think these are all important questions. And yeah, so like you both mentioned, I think it's more about trying, failing, and knowing what works and what doesn't work, which in my experience, trumps over everything else.
These days it's becoming more of like, do I care when Amazon comes out here and delivers a package what engine's in their truck? No, I don't care. I just care that they were on time. My package wasn't, destroyed, and maybe they were nice customer
Yeah.
service wise. I don't know. Maybe they didn't step on the flowers on the lawn or something, right?
Yeah.
That's what we're seeing with customers. They don't, to your point, like they're not. It was a big question at one point, like what models, like, are you training your own, this, that, and the
DeepSeek.
other? With investors, that was like your moat for a little while, they
Yeah.
thought, right? It was like,
Yeah.
well, I don't know, you're not training your own model. They certainly have no moat. It's like, that's not. Luckily, that moment was like maybe 2-3 months long, and then
That's
it
right.
passed, and I
Yeah.
was very happy about that, because I'm like, this
I
is
agree.
not, you're not seeing what really matters. But anyways, yeah, you're right. I think anyways, is like the engine's sort of yeah, they're all pretty good now, and they're only going to get better from here on out. I can tell you they were all abysmal a couple
Yeah.
of years
At
ago,
some
and
point. Yeah.
I mean, I would say like a year and a half ago, I was to the point where I was like, did I make a mistake? I mean, I'll be honest. I'm transparent about things. I was like, man, maybe this isn't, and then of course we made some changes. We got over the hump, and it's like, okay, all right. And then like a few more months go by, our processes have changed. We were able to plug into a more performant LLM, and then I was like, okay, all right, crisis averted. I was having a little questioning for a moment, but yeah. Anyways, things.
Yeah.
I'm happy.
If you don't have a crazy questioning moment every few weeks, are you even running the
Yeah.
company? I
Yeah.
guess
That's right. And even if
It's
you're
tough,
not running
man.
a company, yeah, and
Yeah.
even if you're not running a company, I ask that question to myself every day: is if whatever I'm trying to do with AI, is it really working? And I get asked that question from multiple people, and I just feel like you have to really believe in this technology, and you have to have others believe in it in order to build something really meaningful. Like if you're the only one trying to steer the ship, yeah, there's going to be a lot of bumps
Yeah.
along the
The
way.
skepticism, I mean,
Yeah,
you've probably faced
skepticism is
that a lot.
a
Like
lot.
there's
Yeah,
a lot of different views and
yeah,
perspectives and skepticisms.
yeah,
And I don't feel like it's just skepticism with like, will it work or anything? I'm seeing skepticism more towards so sometimes the ethical nature of it, the impact on society. I mean, I see it from
Mm.
every AI. What do you like? What are you all hearing as well? I mean, I don't know what your
I mean,
major
look,
like
yeah.
objections are that you come across.
Yeah. I mean, look, I mean, I'll have to drop off in 1 minute, so I'm going to wrap this up, and then you guys can continue chatting for a little bit longer if you
Yeah.
need to. I mean, the way I think about it is it's pretty simple, right? I think at this point, I heard this fantastic podcast which I really like. Everything sounds like AI, and then when it becomes normal, it kind of gets called as automation, right? If you think about Grammarly, everything Grammarly does was called AI when it started, right? Google Translate was AI, right? But now we just consider it to be some kind of automation that magically happens, right? So I think the question I always ask is LLM a path in that journey, or is that the end, right? So I don't believe in
Mm.
the whole AGI thing. Like I think I like what Satya Nadella says, unless it gives you 10% GDP, there's nothing called AGI, right? The question is, are we getting real human value, right? And to that
Mm.
extent, I kind of, think of intelligence as one more paradigm, like computers, like storages, like networking is. I think you have intelligence, and the best thing is you get intelligence on tap right now on API, right? I think that's kind of and that'll unlock a ton of use cases. But yeah, I mean, I think on the moral ethical stuff, it's probably another hour to go. But my sense is, I mean, we need like our long conversation. But TLDR, I think my sense is that we'll figure this out. I don't think it's going to be everyone's going to be out of the job. No one's going to have to work anymore. Everyone's going to be on UBI. I don't see that happening in the immediate future. In the long term, who knows?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
no, I'm with you. I don't. I'm just thinking like I was watching just a clip from Kevin Johnson on LinkedIn, and I know you got to go. I'll
Mhm.
just keep it brief.
Yeah.
Basically, he was
Sure.
like, if this helps augment my job even better, like every other automation I've seen, just a more complex level of what it can deliver.
Yeah.
Great. I welcome that. That's great. It makes my job easier. I still am going to be needed. I still have to be
Mhm.
here. They still need somebody who's an expert. These systems can't on their own
Yeah.
and not for any time going forward that any of us can. I'm with you. I don't see the AGI route right now. I think
Mhm.
Wolfram might get, if anyone's going to get there, I feel like maybe Wolfram Alpha Group
Mhm.
has a shot. But
Yeah.
in any case, yeah, I'm with you. I don't think it's just going to help people improve their efficiency, really. This
Okay.
is what I see.
Thanks a lot, Ken. This is great chatting with you. Thank you for being on the show, and looking forward to seeing you in person soon.
Be a DEF CON Black Hat, either of you?
I will.
Both of
I
you?
will. Both of
I'll
us.
be
Both
there
of us.
too. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
mm,
We'll see you there.
okay. I'll send
Can
you
we
a
meet
note. Yeah.
up? I'd love
Yeah.
to
We
meet
should.
up.
We should. We
Let's
should.
do
We
it,
should.
man.
Send you a note. All
All
right.
right. I'll be
Okay.
there for a week.
Cheers.
I'll see y'all.
Cool. Okay.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Sandesh.
Thank you.
Uh, Ken, if you don't mind, I have a few more questions that um so I guess you mentioned something about orchestration being the moat, which kind of piqued my interest, and I really believe in that, right? So let's say you do your evals and you're not happy with the outcome of the evals. So let's say you're not meeting your threshold of 90%, and then you mentioned that you actually go back and look at orchestration and how, like, what exactly do you change? Do you change the prompt, or do you change like something else?
Yeah, it could be the prompt. It could be that. Oftentimes it's context, and then other
Okay.
times it's actually the right model for whatever it is that we're evaluating. So like I said,
Mm,
sometimes Golang, if I was to send that off to like a Google or I wouldn't feel as comfortable throwing that off to like a Google or a Azure OpenAI model right now. I
mm,
would feel more confident with, I would say probably even 3.5 haiku and above. So like the 3.7 sonnet and
yeah,
4 sonnet
force on it.
would be great. Which I do have to like complain a little bit about AWS for a second. Cause like
Go
I
ahead.
will just say that like while they're working, they've been working with us on token limits being raised and whatnot. It's kind of wild to me that AWS is having such a struggle to actually allow people to build production grade applications on
Mm,
top of Bedrock because of
better.
these quota limits. They're really struggling. And I know they're building up data centers and they're trying to, expand
Yeah,
capacity and whatnot. And that has its own implications and whatnot. But in
yeah,
any case,
yeah.
it's been a real struggle. They put a new model online and it's like, it's really tough. But anyways, back to your original question. Yeah, you could change context. You can change, and actually sometimes it's not even the context or the prompt or anything. Sometimes it's actually like we didn't capture because there are some level of deterministic things that we do in terms of reading like package files and different parts of the application where it's like I don't need an LM to read that data and to like suss out,
Mm,
are you
that's
using
right.
like I don't know .NET Core or whatever it is, right? So there's certain and what version. So there's certain
Yeah.
things we do that are deterministic
Mm,
that those
yeah,
could be the problem. Those could be not
that's
feeding the
right.
right data to the LLM. So we have to just
Yeah.
kind of investigate. Like, why did
Yeah.
you? I had one last night where I was like, it wasn't a big deal. It was actually a very minor deal, but I was like curious. I was like, why did the LLM do that?
Yeah.
And I had to
Yeah.
go through and I realized that it was like the way that the phrasing, it was literally the phrasing was slightly
Yeah.
off and it
Yeah.
was confusing. It was like, well, yeah, it's not really authorization, but like because there's a token here, maybe it's used in author. It's like, oh, well, yeah, I didn't make
Yeah.
it very clear in this question. If I had separated these components out, it would have known exactly what I was looking for. So sometimes it's simple and sometimes it's more complex.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and then
Yeah. No, I.
sometimes it's sorry, the last thing I'll say too is sometimes because we use observability, so we have an internal got to log into a VPN to get to this tracing system. But we have a tracing system. And so when we go in there, we can see like its decision tree on the multiple things that we're throwing at it. And why that's important is
Yes.
that sometimes you shouldn't get to step 2 or 3 or 4 if you
Yeah.
didn't pass step 1. And so sometimes you'll see even like bugs where the orchestration was off in those traces where like
That's
it
right.
continued on to steps it shouldn't have continued on to. And that's a little bit more nuanced. And so it's, man, the complexity of orchestration is, it
Yeah.
can't be overstated. It's
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I've had very similar experiences. What I've realized is, if the LLM workflows or automation or your like agentic infrastructure is not doing what you expect it to do, it's often because you have multiple things going on, and if you have the reasoning showing in each step, you can actually pinpoint, okay, which step is not working as expected. And in my experience, what I find out that is, um, replacing LLM based calls with more deterministic based approaches kind of gives you the assurance, like, look, each step, right? Like, if you don't need an LLM in a particular step, then you don't have to. And I don't know, it's just very weird, because oftentimes what I find is I'm over engineering, I'm using LLMs in things where it should not be using. And I think that's the right, finding the right balance, and knowing again when to use versus what not to use seems to be an art. And I think companies and vendors that sort of solve this problem and address the context engineering in a way that is more reliable and consistent will see much better outcomes, right?
And I face that all the time because like the
Yeah,
ramifications of using an LLM when you don't need to can be huge. And if
it's
you
yeah,
don't like in the agentic world, if you aren't properly like we use a graph for some of our policy enforcement because
sure,
we do some complex level of the policies have a job that is tougher than anything else, right? They have to work and they have to take a complex, usually business logic flaw. Where people use is like bug bounty, like bug bounty
hmm,
things that come in repeatedly, or like internal findings where it's like, man, we keep getting hit with this complex authorization thing. It's too difficult to write like we'll say open grep rules or whatever and glue those
hmm,
all together. So that's an NLCP's job to do the really complex things. And what you'll see is when you watch it, it's operating on a graph, and
yeah,
if orchestration falls off, if
yeah,
for some
the whole,
reason that graphing doesn't work, we've got a call that loops and loops and loops and loops. And now something that could have been a deterministic call, but we decided to use an
yes,
LLM for. And
yeah,
if some problem arises, we're spending, man, with those performance models, we're spending a lot of money we didn't need to spend. And,
that's right,
obviously everybody cares about margins. Like
yeah, yeah,
investors,
yeah,
us, everybody cares about margins. So
yeah,
in fact, that's actually, if you're listening and you're going to build an AI product company, you need to be certain that you have proper software company margins using this technology. And to your point, if you over engineer using LLMs all the time, you're quickly going to find that
get
you're
a
going
lot
to
of, yeah,
have problems doing that. So you got to
yeah,
find the balance.
yeah, man, absolutely, 100% agreed with that. Awesome, Ken. This has been a wonderful conversation. Again, thank you so much for speaking to me and Sandesh and sharing all of the learnings. I feel like DryRun is probably one of the few companies I've been following that has been experimenting, researching, exploring the space. Like enough, and sort of actually building a product that is used by customers. So I think, yeah, the more you share, and it's actually good for the community. So again, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for all your contributions. We really appreciate it. Yeah.
No, thank you for having me on here. I really appreciate it. Obviously, I've been following your work, and I watch you as well. I watch your AI related content. I shake my head. I nod furiously a lot. I'm always reading.
Yeah,
I hit you up. I mean, you're like one of
yeah,
the first people I think I had hit up where I was all excited. I was like, "Look what it can do! Look what
yeah,
I sent you that first time was like the prototype, the alpha, the like maybe not even alpha version of what this NLC peak thing, our natural language policies, that's where that kind of originated. So I was like pinging you to be like, hey, like, how's it working for you? Is this okay? And I remember that. So, anyways,
yeah,
just thank you. You've been awesome as far as a community leader, and really appreciate it.
yeah. Uh, Likewise.
Thank you for joining us. If you like the show, please share this with your friends and colleagues. If you have any questions or comments, you can reach Anshuman on Twitter at Anshuman_BH. That's ANSHUMAN_BH. And me, Sandesh, at Juba on Jeans. That's JUBBAONJEANS. See you next time.